So you and I met for the first time at breakfast today, which was deceptive because she was a guest in my world religions class at Piedmont College in the spring semester of 2016. We were heading into the unit on Islam. I was presenting evidence that America has a different relationship with Islam than it does with any other world religion. And I introduced to them on the overhead Dr. Larycia Hawkins, freshly separated from Wheaton College, for suggesting that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. Or was it wearing hijab? We'll get back to that later. But I told her my first question, since I've seen the documentary twice, and some of you have not seen it at all, though how many have, please? Okay, that helps a lot, really. If you are one of the people who didn't raise your hand, I thought she could begin with a wide open question, which is to tell us something about the time frame in the documentary, which begins in December 2015 and ends in November 2017. So how is life different now than it was then? There's an open question.
Well, life is fairly different. I'm a professor at the University of Virginia now. Thank you. But not on tenure track. Boo. Because those are the consequences, right? And that being said, one question people always ask me, so I'll save you, would you do it again? I would do it again and again and again, knowing what I know. So, the reality is academia has changed since I started at Wheaton in the fall of 2007. That's how they say it. Wheaton. Practice. Wheaton. And you say G-O-D, God. So anyway, there you go. If I slip up and say it like that, it's like old habits die hard. But anyway, so since being there, life has taken a dramatic shift on all levels. And I would say, like, what the film covers, that was the original question. The film covers that time period, and the woman who began filming while all this was happening, while all of this was going down, before the separation from Wheaton College, is a Wheaton grad herself. And so one of the things that we'll talk about tomorrow is one of the reasons I trusted her was because I wanted someone who had been shaped, in some sense, by what's really good about Wheaton, and who, on the other hand, was shocked by what was happening in that moment. And the question she poses in the film is, the reason the film is titled Same God is because she said, are evangelicals worshiping the same God? That's what drove her. And so that's what the film is about. It's driving this question about where we are as a country. December 2015, the Trump writing was on the wall, but people weren't paying attention. And that's why I put on a hijab in solidarity with Muslim women who are visibly wearing their religion on their head and were, December 7th, 2015, Trump announced the Muslim ban, which was one of the first things he enacted in his presidency. So that's the film, and it's tracing that. It's not Trump bashing, it's not Wheaton bashing. I wouldn't have it be produced if that were the case, right? And so the film is about that.
So already you want to see it. And again, if this is still too mysterious, the events of that time, I'm going to be focusing on the documentary and the way it treats the events. In other words, there are things on the screen and things that are not on the screen, and that is entirely at her discretion to talk about. But there, in the documentary, one of your colleagues, one of the people I liked very much, said that the Facebook photo you posted of yourself in hijab was like a Rorschach test, and that underneath the photo that she posted, you could have put, "What might this be?" And if you've watched the documentary, you know that the answers, plural, were such a mix of race and gender and religion and global politics and academic unfreedom and institutional captivity that it made me helpless to know which one of those stood out the most for you. So I'm wondering which one of those stood out the most for you with the uproar that followed the posting of that photo.
Yeah, so one thing I didn't explain in my explanation just now is that I made this post on Facebook that went viral, stating my solidarity, what I call embodied solidarity with Muslim women. And so the post went viral, and that's how the school found out, or I'm sure they would have found out anyway. Because I worked at school too. But that being said, he talks about that picture as a Rorschach test. And I think, to your question, I think it has to be all of the above, because I teach at the intersection of race, religion, and politics. And so I realized I went to graduate school and got a PhD in a very niche area. If you don't know what academics do, we study like a tiny sliver of something. And in essence, what I realized when I started teaching is, I used to say, I'm not an expert on gender, I'm not an expert on class, right? But I realized I have to be. Because to be an expert on race, I have to be an expert on all the multiple overlapping intersections that are reified in my body and in other people's bodies. So I'm the object and the subject of which I teach. That's effed up. It's heady stuff. It's difficult. But that's why my body's a Rorschach test, right? I mean, and so many of your bodies are too. And so the question is how we're going to proceed in the face of the Rorschach test that our bodies present. But certainly the symbolism of a black professing Christian woman at a predominantly white evangelical institution that calls itself liberal arts on Facebook was something of presented a roadblock for administration and for supporters of the institution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it was all of the above. I can't eliminate any one of those as an important variable. Whether or not the school says it wasn't about the picture of me in a hijab, that it wasn't the hijab itself, it was the theological import of the statement that Muslims and Christians worship the same God.
Which Pope Francis had said very shortly before.
Right.
Which didn't help.
No. The fact that I invoked Francis, we're all Catholic. It's the mothership, in case you didn't know. We're all on that ship, right? And so to evoke solidarity with the Pope, he had just gone to Central African Republic, where the magisterium, like the Holy See, they had advised him not to go there, right? So it was like a Samaria moment. He went where no one would go. And he went and said to the Muslims who were being attacked by Christians, we worship the same God. And so I invoked him. But talking about Catholics as fighting words in the evangelical world. So that too, perhaps was, well, not perhaps, I know. These were seen as unsavory words. So anyway.
I don't know what order to ask these questions in. I will tell you this. I mean, I'm very happy with your answer, because even in the world of world religions and not political science, it is impossible to unbraid all those things that we just talked about. And to isolate them as if you can reduce anything to one is to far oversimplify the problem. So, and it is one reason why I think the photo of you was so captivating for my students, is you're a committed Christian. And to see a committed Christian catching all that heat, for solidarity with a neighbor, it brought the same issue to our classroom in a far different and less painful way than it brought it home to you. But it was a big eye-opener for them. So you affected people so far away, I can't imagine. Watching the documentary, and maybe I had company, I really noticed a difference between the Larycia of December 2015, and the Larycia of 2017. So the way I wrote the question for you was, what became clarified for you during those 2 years in the documentary that so affected that change?
I've had people say also the Larycia of the December press conference, the press conference 2 days after I was put on administrative leave, and the Larycia of the January press conference where I said something you're going to ask me about, Wheaton didn't give me Jesus and Wheaton can't take We got the black church in the house. Woo, woo. Go on, girl. But I like amens and stuff. But amen. Hallelujah. Anyway, I didn't grow up with that. I grew up in a very quiet Black Baptist church where one woman would get the Spirit and my mom, I'd go, Mommy, what's wrong with Sister Emma, Jean? She'd say, baby, just be quiet, be quiet. She got the Spirit. We don't do that here. Papa don't like the Spirit. Papa don't like the Holy Spirit. Anyway, Papa was my pastor who, if you saw the film, baptized me and died of a heart attack 2 days later. So I make jokes, but it's real close to my story and who I am. But what did you ask me again?
It doesn't even matter. Just keep going. So
I'm just trying to lighten the mood because this is traumatizing. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's traumatizing. I'm just sorry. I'm sorry.
No.
No.
And I'm going to lighten up. We're going to talk about...
Re-ask me that question. So I make jokes and go non-academic. I used to hate how Oprah would switch between voices, and now I understand. When you're talking a lot in front of people, then you do your black voice, you do your guru voice, you do your whatever. So ask me the question. I'm good.
Well, because you got such a rise about, and again, another quote from the documentary, that Wheaton didn't give me Jesus and they can't take him away from me. What I did talk to Larycia about was how actually in world religions class, I realized ridiculously for the first time that while Christians make much of Christianity, a singular thing, one faith, one body, one church, one baptism, one hope, that Christianity was in fact almost a verbal dodge. It was a large tent under which many different kinds of Christianities, plural, both dwelt and competed and excommunicated each other. So my question to probably a tent full of people who've been excommunicated from something or another, I hope you have.
If you haven't, you need to work harder. I'm for real.
So here's where you can minister to me is, when other Christians call us out and say we are less than Christian or not Christian, the question is who's to say? Who's to say that exactly? And it is a question from my heart to ask who decides whether any of us is really Christian or not. So good luck with that one.
Yeah.
I'd like to know.
I get accused often, as you might imagine, of not being a Christian. Or when the Facebook post went out, nice white men would Facebook message me or Twitter DM me and say, explain things that I might not understand or know, right? And it's not just mansplaining, it's white evangelical splaining, right? Because it's a different tack. It's a way of you may not know this, but you may not understand the implications of what you said, but mofo, I read Calvin and Luther and Zwingli in undergraduate. So I don't use that word. My mom doesn't let me. But I use the abbreviation, which I guess is okay. But I read these as an undergrad at Rice University. So I had an entire class of reading these reformers in the original. I spent an entire summer with the Pew Foundation, a fellowship that was funded by the Pew Foundation for Christians going into areas related to public affairs because they wanted to have an influence. So then I read St. Thomas, right? I read Augustine.
It's Florida that confuses
whatever.
us.
I read Augustine. And I'm saying this to say, not to tout my, bona fides. I took Latin too, and I just mispronounced that. But the reality is those are the people who think they're the gatekeepers. And I worked at an institution for 8.5 years that promulgate themselves as the gatekeepers, and who instead of having a conversation about what we mean when we say Muslims, Christians, and Jews are of the Abrahamic tree, that's in the text, right? That's in the text that white evangelicals read. That's in the NIV. That's in the New Living. That's in the Message. It's in the New King James, and it's in the King James that I read growing up. And so for the black body that I inhabited, a woman who teaches at the intersection of religion and has read a lot of theology, no, I'm not a theologian, but who was taught when I was a child, it's important to rightly divide the word of truth. And I'm the girl who still takes that to heart. Like, for you to call me not a Christian, it's water off of my back.
Yeah.
I know whom I have believed. That's an old hymn that I learned in the Baptist church. And it's not a he, it's a she. And so she's able to keep that which I've committed to her until that day when whatever happens, rapture, whatever, right? I'm kidding. But the reality is, it just doesn't bother me. It just doesn't bother me. And yeah, and I don't use the old "you're not my judge." Like, I just don't care. I don't care. I mean, I've lost everything. I've lost tenure. I lost my students, whom I loved. I lost friends, and I'm about to move from Chicago to Virginia, to a place that Thomas Jefferson built on the backs of my ancestors. So now I get to deal with that shit every day. I'm serious. It's having monuments haunt my every step. And no one acknowledges the natives there, right? The indigenous folk. So the question is not whether you think I'm a Christian, it's what the fuck are you doing to prove that you follow. I was not going to say enough today.
See, and this is a little difference between the Larycia of 2015 and the Larycia of...
But that is, as Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis said this morning, are you living and religion, as Father Richard Rohr says, religion is a system unto itself. It's a false system that always worships itself. I'm not interested in religion. So if you want to call me not a Christian, I don't care. I'm a follower of a radical Jesus who embodied solidarity with the least and the last and the lost, was about liberation. And so if you haven't been exiled for seeking to liberate, and you're not trying hard enough, then you need to do some soul work about why it is that you haven't been exiled from some community. Some community. I'm serious.
Gotta get kicked out of somewhere, really?
I'm serious. It might be, I don't know. But I think it is about love, as she said this morning, which sounds trite, but it's about loving God and loving our neighbor and loving ourselves. And so that's what I cling to. That's who I am. That's who I hope I'm becoming. And that's my foundation. So Christian, not Christian, I don't know. Whatever.
Now, in this, we've got wonderful circles going already. The question your friend posed about whether evangelicals worship the same God, I'm sure Episcopalians do not. So it's a wonderful question again. And in the film, there are interesting theological questions like, do we worship the same God? Yes. Do we describe that God the same way? No. Do we do it? So there's plenty of theology in there. But I'm way more interested in embodied solidarity, and that's the phrase that. The woman to my right, I go back and forth between Larycia, and I think that's too familiar. Dr. Hawkins uses a lot as embodied solidarity because I am invited to sign more petitions and more declarations and to attend more discussions than I can tell you, and you put something on your head and lost everything. So embodied solidarity to me is the way you get kicked out of something. It looks to me like the best way to get kicked out of something. So the question that I did pose to you was, I'm hungry for other examples of what it is like to embody your solidarity, with people who are in trouble so that you get in trouble yourself. Like the hijab. I had a friend who said he observed Ramadan, but that doesn't show like a hijab shows on your head.
No.
Other examples?
Sure. But I imagine if you live in a town, most people are moving towards very urban areas. Going to the mosque, when you are not Muslim, is a way of embodying solidarity, right? I don't recommend what a lot of good white liberal Protestants do. The whole switch pulpits one Sunday a year. I don't think that's the best form of embodied solidarity, actually. It's the checklist approach to diversity and inclusion that most universities and white institutions do. But I do think that we have examples, history is replete with examples of folks that we admire, and I would submit to you most humanitarians that we admire embodied solidarity. Jesus, no self-respecting Jew walked through Samaria, they went around it. And so Jesus going through Samaria, where the half-breeds lived, right, was a way of embodying solidarity with the least and the last and the left out. Daring to touch a woman, to be seen with a woman, namely a supposed loose woman, right, was a form of embodied solidarity. I think embodied solidarity really represents learning, like Hebrews says about Jesus, by that which we have suffered. I think embodied solidarity requires going close to suffering, which is not something most of us are really acquainted with, suffering and grief. And so embodied solidarity, in the example of Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., is this. He was upper middle class black man. And can I tell you what changed his ministry? It wasn't the 1964 Voting Rights Act. It wasn't the 1965 Civil Rights Act. It was going to North Lawndale and Chicago, being booed, choosing to live where the poorest African Americans lived in the city, and suffering with, embodying solidarity. So he could understand, and that led to the Poor People's Campaign that we now seek to reinvigorate, right? Gandhi, the same. Elite lawyer, Brahmin, went to the lowest of the low. He chose that. So there's a lot of divestment of privilege and power that even people at Wild Goose Festival aren't very comfortable with. Sleeping in a tent is not a divestment of your privilege and power when you drive your Volvo and your BMW and your $80,000 camper. I'm serious. So what does it look like for you to embody solidarity? Only you can know that. Only you can know. And it does not look the same for all of us. And it may look like putting something on, literally, but it probably looks like taking something off, namely your power and your privilege, your status, being willing, like having done the soul work to know that this is going to cost you something. It's going to cost you something dearly. And the reality is, I did not think that I was going to get constructively dismissed from a university, that's legal language, for wearing a hijab. I did not think about that. It was something I knew I was supposed to do, and I did it. But the way had been prepared. So I walked into it, and I stayed on that road. And what gave me the courage were people like you, who I didn't know, sending me thoughts and prayers. I felt them. I felt your strength. And again, I living into the story that I think Jesus embodies, which is embodied solidarity. Also, Jesus' mother Mary wore a hijab too, in case, So.
There are billboards like that in Atlanta now that show Mary with her veil, a Catholic sister in her veil, and show a Muslim woman in hijab and say they wear it for the same reason.
Yes.
However you want to parse that. Do you have any of those billboards where you live yet? They're coming. I'll bet you they're coming.
I love it.
Embodied solidarity, I should have think through this question better, but how many of you have been arrested for nonviolent resistance in some way, been hauled away because it's just an interesting thing. It's become on my bucket list, but I need to be careful or I'll get what I asked for, right? I told my bishop I'm looking for a good opportunity, but he has to go with me. So far he hasn't called, but maybe he will. And he's a terrific bishop. And to go back to my friend who fasted during Ramadan, that is embodied solidarity, especially when Muslim friends, people in the Muslim community know you're doing that, especially if you show up for Friday prayers as well. That is embodied. I was simply pointing out something you said at the beginning of the documentary, which is this is wearing it. You know, anybody who walks by you can see the hijab, and not everybody who walks by you can see that you're really hungry, you know, until the sun goes down. So I didn't mean to dismiss that was embodied, but this one is, you know, so visible. You mentioned, you know, you're being interviewed, but when you say what was the question, I don't remember either. So we're in great shape here. But I will tell you, you've talked about your family already. And when my husband and I watched the documentary for the second time, that's all he could talk about was your family. And you invited them to be part of this documentary. Your grandmother, framed portrait of your grandfather who baptized you and died 2 days later. Your parents, who are remarkable. And your father, who famously said she was a stubborn girl, and she is an even more stubborn adult, and I say that in a complimentary way. So I do wonder about the importance of family, you know, immediate family as you went through this.
Yeah. So my 87-year-old grandmother, just to know, she grew up Church of God in Christ, which is Pentecostal. And my grandfather was Baptist minister. When they got married, she became Baptist. She still believes to this day, that women should all wear dresses to church. When I'm around her, I do. And that you should have church 3 times a week, Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and Wednesday night, and you pray on your knees, and she does that to this day, every night. The only time she has not prayed on her knees since I knew her was when she broke her kneecap falling on ice. So that's my grandmother, and that's on one side, and my heritage. On the other side is the Episcopalians. Growing up Baptist in the buckle of the Bible Belt, I knew them as the Christians who drank. You know, my first drink was like a spiritual experience, for real. No, seriously, I had all this angst, it's like purity culture, drinking culture, all these like, all go hand in hand in Oklahoma. But I say that to say my grandmother on the other side and my great aunt were at the March on Washington. And my dad was 14 when that happened. And he told me that he knew it was a significant event and he wanted to go. And my grandmother said no. And he said, I never cried, but I cried. I was so upset. And when she got back, she said, we couldn't take you because we weren't sure we would make it back. So embodied solidarity has always been a part of my story and what my family has done. My grandfather, who baptized me, served in World War II. He volunteered. He was flat-footed. He was not supposed to be accepted, but he was. He was a translator in the Asia theater, East Asian, Asia Pacific theater of World War II, because he learned languages that quickly. He was at Agra. If you've ever been to Agra near the Taj Mahal, there's a fortress there. And he did that not because he believed in war. He was quite a pacifist, but because he felt like this was a way to further the rights that were on paper that were not yet fulfilled, that remained promises unfulfilled. And he came back to be spat on walking down the street. And my mom and her siblings could not try shoes on in Oklahoma City because they were black. That's what he came back to. But they maintained their dignity, and I never heard them say a negative thing about white people as a group or about white people individually. And that's my story. Those are my people. My parents were 5 in 1955, which means they were the first to integrate their schools following Brown v. Board of Education. That's my family. And my mother was only the second class in 1968, and my father, that's where they met at the University of Oklahoma, to integrate OU because Jim Crow laws were worse in Oklahoma than anywhere in the country. And OU was the last holdout of a university. Therefore, the story of my family is a story of resilience and dignity and love for neighbor and embodied solidarity with people who literally hated them and who they never cast them as their enemy. So that's the background I come from. I mean, and that's who I am, and that's who I want to honor. I want to honor the spirit of my ancestors who have departed, but who have gone before me. And I want to honor the ones still alive, like my 87-year-old grandmother who prays for me to find a husband and other things that she thinks are important. I'm all about that. Hope he has a little money. But, that kind of thing. So, I don't know. I mean, these people, I feel so blessed to have, and my bratty sisters, have such a, and I'm saying this to say, the miracle of my family is I'm a professor, I have a sister who's a lawyer, and I have a sister who is a doctor. And I'm not saying that from a class position, I'm saying that in the Black church we say, we've come this far by faith. That can only happen, not in America, but by the faith of people who chose love and not hate. That's it. And that's the people I come from. So I love my family. I could talk about them all day. I didn't even mention my nephew.
Are you an eldest child?
I'm the oldest. Yes.
Oh, I knew it.
I'm the oldest.
Yeah. How did you avoid becoming an ordained person? Because that's what we do. We're working out. No, that's not a serious question. You do not. Although yes, it just became one. You're a person of deep faith, and you could have pursued graduate and PhD study in any area. Tell me about this.
Well, I grew up in a place where, and in an institution, right, where that was not a possibility for me. That's a good answer. So I did not think that pastor or theologian, and this is not because my parents said that. My parents never put limits on what we could do. It was not like some immigrant families and or Black families where my parents said, you have to be twice as good. They never said that, I just knew. Because I walk into white institutions every day of my life and I know. I'm more dressed up than you because this is what I learned as a child. This is what I learned, not that my mother taught me, well, she kind of did, but as a Black woman, I can't show up and be underdressed. I'm not taken seriously. Right? I can't show up here and be underprepared in any setting, whether I'm the invited speaker or not, right? So that's also wrapped up in this question of what's possible and the possibilities of the horizon, but I'm so disaffected by institutionalized religion, and I remember hearing people say that when I was growing up that I would invite to church, right? The institution of religion. Blah, blah, blah. And I say it now. Because what I've experienced in my adult life is a lot of spiritual trauma and abuse in the form of the institution that people call the church. And so I don't know that I'm called to ever be a preacher or a theologian, but what I am called to do in my life, I know, is teach. And if I don't have an academic position, I'll always be teaching. And I'll always be teaching at the intersection of transcendence and transformation. And I think ultimately that's what Jesus presents to me in the gospel. So,
whew. Because you, why not? Because you are dressed so much better than I am.
I like this.
I have a personal question, and it's about the documentary, all right? How many of you would let somebody into your house to watch you in the kitchen in your pajamas making an egg? And the question is this: that had to be quite a decision, not that scene particularly, but you trusted Linda Midget, you said so, and we'll hear again more from her tomorrow. But it was a big decision to let someone come pretty far into your home, your life. Anything for us to hear about that decision to let cameras into the place you live?
Mm-hmm. Some of that was Linda's somewhere back there. I saw her, but the more the more people follow you around with a camera, the more comfortable you get. Like with some guy sticking like a microphone down your dress and your bra, like
She said they didn't even have to ask for permission after
just
a while.
like-
It's just like, drop it in.
Here you go. Ain't nothing to look at here. But mosquito bites. But seriously, it's a joke from, I don't know, whatever. The reality is, I don't even know how that pajama scene unfolded. But I knew her well enough by then that she showed up at my house and the camera guy. I was still in my pajamas. And when I see that scene, I'm like, my hair looks horrible. It was washed, but I had just like thrown it back. And really what people ask me about is like, you only eat one egg for breakfast?
I was very impressed
I'm like,
by
leave
that.
me alone.
Very impressed.
I put some cheese on there. But yeah. But it became, and also, I mean, I was super out of it. And so it's just like, like any decision I didn't have to make was like, you want to film me in my pajamas? Fine. So I don't know.
No, it's a good answer.
It's not the Kardashians. It's nothing like that. It's not, no. It's nothing happening there. Just the PJs, the Christmas PJs. I get a pair every Christmas. That was one of the Christmas PJ pairs. So.
Because of that, I will say this to you. One embodied solidarity piece I saw was your solidarity with your own face in that documentary. Because you know, your grief showed, your sorrow showed. And there were times, again, there was no makeup on that grief. And it, you know, the long shot of all the way from the pajamas to the face is that I felt very close to you, and I felt like I knew you very well. And so for your willingness to allow that to happen, to allow complete strangers to step one toe into your story was hugely generous of you. And it was, hugely generous. We have just about 10 minutes left, and I was going to ask you when you wished that the camera had been called cut sooner, and you may have just answered that. And then I was going to ask you your most beloved scene in that documentary, which I may, but I'm going to tell you mine first. And it is, if you've seen the documentary, a point at which a young Muslim woman named Nadia Ibrahim in hijab comes on camera, and she's alone. She's being interviewed documentary style. And here's what she says. She says very strongly and boldly, I'm going to be the next Dr. Hawkins. When any American is wronged and their rights are not fulfilled, I will do the same thing. And then she burst into tears and covered her face with her hand and stayed that way till the cut closed. Had you saw that for the first time. What is that like to hear her say she wants to be the next Dr. Hawkins?
That was the point. I mean, I was like, I have post-traumatic stress, so it's very hard for me to cry. I tear up and then like my body shuts it off. But I teared up and my body shut it off. And that you actually told me actually in the email that was the point at which maybe you lost it, seeing that. And for me, if I could have cried, that's where I would have cried. It's a very humbling, it's humbling to have people here listening to us talk about our journeys, and that people feel like you have something to say or something to share when you feel you've been so shut out of certain communities. So for a Muslim woman to say she felt what I intended is everything. That's everything.
Oh, I know. That's... To intend embodied solidarity is one thing. To have it recognized, received, embraced, and then mirrored is the remarkable thing. And I would love one day to find out how she found a way to do that herself. So I brought you to tears again. I want to lob her a softball. Okay. Like I want to go straight to the New York Times book review and say, so what books would we be surprised to find on your shelves?
Me?
Let's just take a break here. Yeah, if I came to your house, I mean, first of all, you don't have them all anymore. I assume some are in storage or...
A lot are in storage.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think this crowd would be surprised. I mean, I've had a Quran for a long time, and I've had the Book of Mormon, and I study these things. So I don't know what would surprise this group. Oh, this is it. I study, when I was at Wheaton, I began studying Tea Party women and their narratives, right? Their narratives, I'm going academic mode, but their narratives are what laid the way, if you will, for Trump to walk in to make America great again. The birther narrative, which he created, they carried that torch. It was Tea Party women. So I continued to study Tea Party women into the Trump administration, by which I mean I teach about this. So I have all kinds of cray-cray books. I was recently at the Goodwill or the Salvation Army, one of the two. I love thrifting. And I found a whole slew of books by Rush Limbaugh.
Oh, this would be
written
a surprise.
to children. And so I have a whole set of those. I've got the book about the Duck Dynasty, Duck Commander Dynasty. It's part of this. It's part of the same culture. So y'all, if you came to my tiny basement apartment in Charlottesville, Virginia, you would see a whole slew of Rush Limbaugh children's books. Way. Now let the New York Times marinate on that.
Okay. Oh, it would be...
That's what academics get to do. We get to read these things with glee and delight. I was so excited to find these things. So,
we were in a public place this morning when we had breakfast, but Larycia did visit me at the Magnolia Manor Inn, which meant she came into a Confederate general's old home. And when we went into the dining room, she looked and noticed long before I did that on the wall was a framed pistol and a picture of a guy with a cheroot in his mouth and his watch chain and his well-fed belly hanging over his belt. And did you run out of the room and say, "Get me out of here now"? What did you do?
I took a picture with him.
You took...
Right next to the gun. The gun was pointing at me, and I was like...
She did. You may
put that
see
in
it
your
on...
pipe and smoke it. Just kidding. I don't know.
And we're laughing.
Trying to laugh so we don't cry, right?
We're laughing so we don't cry because I walk into that room and don't see it and don't even think about where I am or what's on the wall until you are in that room with me. And then what I see, because you came to breakfast with me, which is a very odd and minor
Girl, you
form
staying
of...
on the plantation. I'm kidding. But no, but I did notice.
Yeah.
This is one of the things I wanted to ask you all about what we see and what we don't see.
Yes.
Did you see the sign across the street? Hot Springs. This is a concentration camp for German prisoners. We have no enemies. We are one. For the Germans who, they weren't, these were young people. Like your 18-year-old children.
Do you know
right?
this story? Could you tell us?
I don't know the freaking story. I just saw the freaking sign. And I took a photo of that sign. And next to that sign is another sign in color. Civil War Trails. This is where we are. That's where we are. That's our location. And we have to know. Because everywhere you go, you can embody solidarity and speak truth to power. And speaking truth to power and embodying solidarity is about recognizing how places are still colonizing bodies. My body feels colonized in this place. And a lot of you in your churches talk about decolonizing the institution called the church. And most of you, when you think about the church, you think about an American version of a religion that didn't start in the West, right? And I think that those are the kinds of things that we all need to do. Be aware of. We don't know what we don't know, right? We don't know what we don't know. But we have to hide. I believe if Jesus does anything, if you believe in the Jesus, Jesus allows us to see the world differently. So we need to see differently in order to act differently. So, yep.
You may have just answered my last question, but there are a lot of people here, and because we're being recorded, even more people are listening. So I wanted to let the last question be, what do you want us to leave being sure we heard you say? And again, you may have just answered it. this is your last word, to be sure we don't leave this tent without hearing what you want us, what our takeaway is. Please do not forget, she said.
I mean, obviously, we're first. Are you a firstborn too?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I thought so. I'm a 1 on the Enneagram, if you didn't already figure that out. That's neither here nor there, but it just means I don't want you to leave comfortable. So I just want to challenge you to set dangerous intentions, pray dangerous prayers, to never make peace with oppression. There's an old prayer from the Book of Common Prayer of like 1928 for social justice. I knew the Episcopalians would know which one it was. Ah! And all the Reformed people out there know when I say, like, goodness, truth, and beauty. What's good and true and beautiful. I know what denomination you come from if you say that stuff. But in any event, I think also capturing the view that all of life is sacred, and I think you all think you think that, but I don't think you do, because you send your kids to Tony private school so they don't have to go to school with the poor black and brown kids. So I would challenge you to rethink all of your commitments through the lens of every child is your child, that we are all one, and if we believe that, then we have to act in those ways. And I've been reading Richard Rohr on the Holy Spirit. I've been avoiding reading this book for a long time, called The Divine Dance. But one thing that he says, he talks about the wisdom of the Trinity and the flow of the Trinity. And I think if we thought more about God and the universe as one, I've really began calling God the universe, because this has also complicated my spiritual life, all this Wheaton stuff. And a lot of Christians are uncomfortable with it, and that's when they call me not a Christian, when I talk about the universe. But if there is a God, God is one. And God permeates all things, and Trump is not the enemy. There is no enemy if we believe that we're all one. And so I would just challenge you to press into the wisdom that is the universe, that beckons us to bow to the divine in the other, in our neighbor, and to those that we consider our enemy. And so that's it. I think our world would be a different place if we really saw the dignity and the divineness of all living things. So thank you.
Dr. Larycia Hawkins.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, all of you, go follow me on Twitter, and also follow Same God Film, because I want to stay connected to you, and that's really how I can stay connected to you after today. Twitter, I'm also on Instagram. I would love to stay connected, and I'm here to talk if you want to talk outside. And Linda's in the back with cards about the film if you want to learn more about the film. Bring it to your city, and if you want to support us in any way, we would love your support. We're poor. We're very poor. And we just need your love. We don't just need your money, we need your love. Thank you all. Your love. Peace.